Hey guys, it's Aubrey from I Guess I Make Things, and today we are filming a tutorial for my boxy bags. So it's not really a pattern, but I'm going to show you the math of how I figure out the size. We're going to figure out how large to make them, and then I'm going to walk you step by step through how to make a boxy bag. I am using this tote as a reference. This is a tote that I use making just cottons and interfacing, but my preferred method is quilted. So we're gonna do a quilted one on the tutorial today. It's unbuilt, I've cut all the fabric already, but that is what we're gonna make, and I will use this one to reference and show you guys the differences between the two and help you guys understand how they are different. So thank you for joining along, and hopefully this is helpful. If you have any other ideas for more like long form tutorials that you guys would like, please comment those down below and we'll get right into it. It's Obs from the future. I'm gonna go over the math. The bags that I make are the exact same size. So mine, I'm using a 15 by 10 inch piece for all of it, because you're using the same size for everything. So depending on how big or small you want it to be, it's gonna change how big the fabric that you use is gonna be. I will put the math here on the screen so you can pause. But this is my actual makeup bag that I use every day, and it fits all my makeup fairly easily. And if you're going to use it for makeup, what I would do is just measure your brushes, your foundation, whatever your biggest piece of makeup is, and then just go like an inch or two bigger than that, height and width wise. But you could do anything with it. You can make them smaller. Just keep in mind that if you're trying to make them not as tall, the height of the boxy bag is coming from the corner cuts. And then obviously the length of the fabric is going to determine how long it is. And then the width will also factor into the height, but not quite as much as these corner pieces. I will say with this one that we filmed making today, it was actually thick enough that I wasn't able to sew through it for some reason, so I had to go hand sew the inside lining shut. So I would recommend, unless you're a very confident sewer, I would make first a bag that is just interfacing in cotton. I made this today. You can tell it's not quite as structured compared to this. This holds its shape a lot better. It's also cuter, okay? Can we just be honest with that? But this is the easiest thing to make, to try it the first time, because there's just less fabric to work with and you can kind of learn what you are sewing and where it's gonna impact the design overall. Another thing that I will say is I like to put zipper tabs on, and I did put that in the video for today, but I put zipper tabs on. Another option that you can do that I don't have an example of, but is if you want a strap that starts from this corner to this corner, figure out what the width of your bag is, go an inch longer on each side, so 2 inches longer overall, and then in this step where you are sewing the corners together, which is almost the very last step of the bag, I'll point it out where it is, you would insert the strap on either side and then sew it into those corners. So that is another option. These are some of my favorite things to make, as you can tell. We have 3 alone that have no home right now. They'll find good uses though. This is the one that I do use every day, and I love it. It's one of my favorite things I've ever made, just because of how useful it is. I would start all interfacing, all cotton. Once you get confident with that, then maybe do the quilted top with a cotton inside. I honestly do terry cloth just because I have a lot of that, but it's not my favorite thing. I'd probably do cotton, but I do kind of like the look of towel on the inside, especially if you're going to use it for makeup. I don't know why, it just makes sense in my brain. Another recommendation, as you can tell on this one, a sport zipper. So you can see it's a really chunky zipper. It is hard to sew through. I do not recommend that. This was a test that I did. I would more recommend the classic zippers. That is going to be easier to sew through for your sewing machine. This was harder for my machine to get through. I already had prepped my fabric, so I'm going to walk you through the pieces that you need. Also, anywhere I am using batting, if you are going to use interfacing, just swap those out. And anywhere you see me using the toweling fabric, that is going to be your inside fabric. Here I am prepping my 2 main pieces of fabric. I'm going to use this denim colored material and quilt it using the batting that you can see me setting them up with. And then I have my 2 inside pieces already cut, and then I have some strips of fabric that are cut for my zipper tabs. For the zipper tab pieces, I tend to just eyeball it based on how wide my zipper is, and then I usually go about 7 to 8 inches long. Now that I have my pieces all together, I made sure to quilt the two top pieces because you need those quilted first. If you want to quilt interfacing, just be aware that it is not going to give you the quilted look that this will give. The stitches will sit more on top of the fabric and it won't have this textured of a look. You can also see in the interfacing example that I showed at the beginning of the video that I did not quilt it. It's totally optional. This is just a look that I prefer. Now that we have both of our top pieces ready to go, we are good to grab our zipper. I am using a 16-inch zipper because the length of my fabric is 15 inches. I typically recommend about an inch longer than your length. And then we're going to line these up. So you're going to see I'm going to put my zipper side down. So the right side of the zipper facing the right side of your outside fabric. And then we're going to sandwich an inside lining on top. If you are using an inside lining that has a right side, you are going to put the right side facing down. So the right side of your inside lining should be touching the right side of your outside fabric, and the right side of the zipper should be touching the right side of your outside fabric, but the inside of the zipper touches the right side of your inside lining. That makes sense, right? As we get to sewing, you are going to notice that the actual zipper pull piece will get in the way, and I will show you where to pull it so that you can have straight lines as we're sewing. Using your zipper foot, we are going to sew all of these layers together. You can see I'm lining up my zipper with that little notch in the presser foot, and you want to get as comfortably close as you can to the zipper so that you can sew, but not so close that the zipper does not function. With the zipper foot lined up and the fabric ready to go, we are just going to sew the entire length of the fabric. The way that I sewed this, the zipper pull is at the end of this piece of fabric, and I'm going to show you what I do as I approach the end so that I can avoid the zipper. And now that I'm about an inch or two away from the zipper pull, I'm going to take my piece off the sewing machine and I'm going to open the zipper back past where I've already sewn. And then I'm going to realign the zipper, the inside lining, and the outside lining, and then continue to sew to the end. This step can be particularly hard with quilted material and with a thick inside lining because it's harder to feel the zipper. So you can see I'm using my fingers to make sure that it is the zipper going through the foot and not under the needle. It's a tricky task, but it's very effective. Now that our layers are sewn together, we're going to open up the piece and we're going to pull the zipper to one side and then pull the right side of the outside fabric and the inside lining the opposite way. And the stitch we're going to do is going to be more of a finishing stitch. And what you want to do is to keep the fabric as far away from the zipper as you can and sew it into place. This will help make the zipper work functionally on the bag and keep fabric from getting stuck on it. Here is a good example of what that finishing stitch looks like on the outside of the fabric. And then here is what it looks like on the inside. You just want to be sure that that inside lining is pulled as far away from the zipper so you can pull it shut. When I am doing the stitch on my sewing machine, I always start with the zipper open like this. Again, we're trying to avoid any wonky lines because of the presser foot working around the zipper. So I just worked my way down, and then once I get close enough to where the zipper was, I lift my presser foot and then close the zipper so it's out of my way and then continue to sew. And it's just important to keep tugging at the fabric again to make sure it's far away. Now we're going to take our other right side of our exterior fabric and take the freshly sewn piece we just finished and repeat the sandwich from earlier. So we're going to put the zipper facing down and line it up with the top. And yes, all your pieces should line up right now. So you'll notice I have a overhang on my right side. That's just because I cut wrong. So just ignore it. You won't see it on yours as long as you cut correctly. So we're going to do zipper facing down and then grab the other inside lining. And again, if you have a right side facing fabric, this should be right side facing down. Mine's double-sided, so you just don't see it as much. And then essentially we're just going to repeat all the steps that we have just completed on the first side. So we're going to sew all these layers together and then we are going to pull them aside and we're going to do that finishing stitch again. These are important stitches because they determine really if your zipper is going to function, and they also are very visible in the finished product. So you can see I went ahead and opened the zipper a little bit just because I know I'm going to be starting at the very top where the zipper pull was. Just be mindful of where the zipper pull is, especially once the fabric is thicker like this. I'm working with very thick material. I cannot see the zipper as easily, so I want to be very precise. Here is a visual of me repeating that process again, and you can see I could tell I was about to hit the zipper. So I did do a back stitch, take it off the sewing machine, and then I closed the zipper all the way and then continued to sew that layer until it was completed. And then once this entire length of fabric was completed, I took all of that off the sewing machine and then I opened it up, making sure to pull the inside lining for both sides away from the zipper. So you should be able to see the zipper as you can see here. So you should have a lining on each side and an outside fabric on each side. And then I went right back into the sewing machine and did the finishing stitch that we've already done before. I do think this goes a lot faster once you're more acquainted with these bags. You don't need to reset quite as much. But do take your time, go slow, make sure you can see here I'm tugging that inside lining out of the way just to double check that it is not going to get sewn in the way of the zipper. Now that we have our main body piece together, we're going to get our zipper tabs ready, or if you want to do a handle, get that ready. So I'm just grabbing two of these strips and putting them right sides together, and then I'm going to sew them on either side and then flip it right side out. So that's me indicating where to sew, and then I flipped it right side out. And then I'm going to cut this in half. I just needed one strip because I'm going to be doing zipper tabs. And then you basically just take each of those and fold them to make a zipper tab. If you want to zigzag stitch their loose threads together at the very end where they meet, you can. I didn't really care to. And then we're going to set these aside for the next step that we'll be completing. Alrighty, with our tabs set to the side, we're now going to open up the lining and we're going to take the two lining pieces and pull them to one side and then the two exterior fabrics and we're going to pull them to a different side of the zipper. And this is where we're going to start needing to be very specific with what and where we are sewing. So in this step, we are going to sew the outside fabric all the way through and then the inside lining only sew on either side and leave about a 2 to 3 inch gap, and that is what we're going to use to flip the fabric inside out later on. Okay, with those sewn, we now need to make sure to open our zipper as wide as humanly possible because if you do not, you will not be able to turn this right side out. And then we are going to take our fabric and make a weird sandwich. So we're going to sandwich the zipper. So right side of the zipper facing the right side of what will be the bottom of the bag. Line the bottom seam up with the zipper. If you are adding a tab, we're going to add the tab in here and I just center it on the zipper. Just make sure that the ends are comfortably on the outside of the bag so that you don't accidentally not sew it in the right spot. And then we're going to clip that into place and we're going to repeat this for both the top and the bottom of the bag. So I'm going to show you the other side now. We're going to line up the zipper. This is the open side of the zipper, so it can be a little trickier. And we're not lining up the end of the zipper with the edge of the fabric. It's lining up the edge of the fabric with the other edge of the fabric. So I'm going to get the other zipper tab, place that where the zipper is going to be, and then clip that into place as well. And then we are going to repeat the same steps, but with the inside lining. You can see that is my gap. And then I'm going to put the inside lining seam and line it up with the inside of the zipper. And then I just throw on basically all my clips just to keep this in place. Again, we're trying to make sure that the fabric lines up. You can see on my outside fabric, you can kind of see it here in this clip. It's not lined up. That's not normal. I fixed it a different way, but yours should all line up perfectly. And we're mostly clipping all this into place because the next step, we're going to isolate the inside lining and the outside fabric from each other. And so the better that you can clip them separately, the easier the next step will be. And this is where you can see about how thick all this fabric is together. So this is why I recommend that you're doing cotton and interfacing if it's your first bag, just so you can get the hang of it. Because the next step gets pretty difficult when you have this much thick fabric all next to each other in your machine. Now, when we're sewing these, you're going to sew the top pieces isolated from the lining. So you can see I have my lining pulled back and clipped out of the way. And I'm going to sew just the outside fabric together at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is me sewing over the zipper. You might catch a little bit of the lining. We're just trying to avoid it as much as possible. And then continue to sew the lining shut all the way. And this is where, at the very beginning of the video, I mentioned that my machine isn't going to be able to get through something and I had to hand sew it. It is the same step, but later on the interior lining. So I switched to the other side. Sorry for the bad editing there, but we have the outside fabric with the inside lining pulled away, and we're just sewing through. And you are going to sew through the zipper, and this is again why I recommended using a standard zipper rather than the sporty zipper, because it is easier for your sewing machine to work through. And really, I'm just trying to show you to take your time. It is thick fabric, even when it's just cotton. So you just want to make sure that you're not stressing your machine or your needle or skipping stitches or anything like that. Then we are going to repeat the same process, but we're going to pull the outside fabric away. And you can just see me. I basically just kind of fold it like a burrito and then clip it so that it's far away from the area that I'm going to sew in on both sides. And we're going to repeat the steps that we just completed for the inside of the fabric. So you can see I just have my inside lining that is going into my sewing machine. I'm sewing it at my seam allowance, which for everything in this bag is a 1/4 inch. And then we're going to repeat the same step. We're going to sew that closed, sew through the zipper, try to keep the outside lining away as much as you can. And that's where I actually had to stop because my machine couldn't handle it and I had to hand sew it. So you can see I just kind of skipped over that and then continued to go all the way to the edge. So now you're going to have two sides of your inside edge sewn and then both sides of your outside edge sewn. And then we are going to get to cutting the corners and getting more height in the bag. With those edges sewn, we are now going to be cutting the corners, which is where we get our height. So I want mine to be 5 inches high, so I'm doing 2.5 inch corners. And I pulled the outside lining away from the inside lining to make it easier to cut. So I'm just cutting, this is just cutting one corner for my outside lining at a time. And you're going to use the same cut for every corner. So you're going to be cutting 8 of these, 4 on your outside fabric and 4 on your inside fabric. So here's me cutting my last corner on my exterior fabric. And you want to be pretty precise with this just because in the next step, when we're going to start sewing these all together, you want to make sure that it lines up as much as possible. So you can see I'm very careful to not overcut, and you can see I didn't cut all the way through. So I'm just going to grab my scissors. I'm very cautious with the rotary blade that I don't accidentally overcut. And then I'm going to repeat all those same steps, but with the inside lining. Theoretically, you could cut all of these together and sew them all together, but then you will have exposed seams on the inside of your bag. So what we are going to do is cut all of these separate. And then in the next step, when we start clipping all of them together, I clip them all and sew them all separately so that inside lining is free from the exterior. And you don't have to worry about any unfinished seams on the inside of your bag that you would have to bind later on. With all those corners cut, we are now ready to align everything together. If you are going to do a more of a handle or a strap, like I talked about in the beginning of this video, this is the step where you would want to do that. And you would most likely want to line the strip up with that middle seam on each piece so that it's centered on the outside of your bag. And just make sure that your loose edges are hanging through this a little bit. So we're going to go through and clip all of them separately. Like I said, we're trying to keep the lining separated from the outside of the fabric at this point, like I said, so we can keep all of the edges just tucked on the inside of the bag so you don't need to worry about finishing all of them. And I just go make sure everything is clipped into place the best that I can. This is also why cutting needs to be done pretty precise. You can see on some, like this one, it lines up pretty well, but some of them are a tiny bit wonky if I accidentally overcut. We're going to do the same thing on all of these. So you're going to have 8 total seams that we're going to sew. If you're doing that strap, like I talked about, the little handle, you're going to want to do it on your outside fabric pieces, not on the inside, or it will be inside of the bag. And you're going to see here in a moment, this is really where you start to see the bag, but you're going to see 2 separate bags. So you're going to see on the right, we have the outside fabric pinned all together in a boxy bag, and then you have the inside on the other side all clipped together. And then we are going to go sew all of those seams. And you could also see the gap in the lining fabric that I just showed there as well. And we're going to sew all of these at a 1/4 of an inch of a seam as well. Be sure to double check because sometimes the fabric will shift even if you pin or clip it. So just make sure as you're sewing that you're checking the fabric because this is a really annoying step to redo if you finish the bag all the way. So make sure to check them as you're doing them and to resew them as you need to so you don't have any fabric gaping or pulling out of the bag all the way. Now that you have all those sewn, we are going to flip the bag right sides out through the hole in the lining. And this is why the zipper needs to be unzipped at this step, because you wouldn't be able to reach the outside of the fabric otherwise. You also want to be pretty gentle with the fabric because you do have seams that are easier to tear at this step just because you're pulling on them. So be sure to be cautious in that regard. Also, be sure to check for any imperfections. If you're noticing anything where the seam isn't finished all the way or something is coming apart, you're going to want to undo what we're doing right now and try to fix that depending on which stitch it is. Once you can see your full exterior lining, then you're gonna wanna make sure that the lining is flipped inside out as well, and then you want to identify the hole that we just pulled the bag through. I usually just put my hand through it, and then I poke out all the corners. You can see I had one imperfection that I had to go fix, but this other side looks great. So I went through and poked all the corners out, and then once you've poked all the corners, fixed anything that's a problem to you, we're gonna pull the lining back out and you're gonna take the hole and you're just gonna flip the raw edges to the inside of the bag, not the bag the inside the bag you're gonna use, but where all the raw edges are hiding. And you're just gonna flip them inside and clip that and then just sew it shut. And that is the final step of your boxy bag. And here is a side-by-side comparison of all the bags that I've made recently. The one on the left is obviously what we made in this video. The one here in the center is one that I made a couple weeks ago that was hiding some reusable makeup wipes. And then here is the cotton interfacing version of the same bag with the same dimensions. And here you can just kind of see the differences between them. Obviously, the two on the left have more of a quilted and textured experience. This one is obviously just a basic cotton piece. However, with the cotton one, you can actually see all the stitches and cuts that we made in this video, and it's a lot easier to see mistakes or to see where things end up versus you can see with this inside lining on the quilted one, it's a lot harder to see all of the seams. And now you know the fundamentals of a boxy bag and how to make it your own. You can see on that orange one, I kind of went crazy with the quilting versus on this more blue denim floral one, I went more subtle and did a grid pattern. So you can truly make it your own dimensions, your own style. Just be sure that whatever you're putting together is going to fit through your machine. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe to keep supporting the channel, and all my supplies are linked in the description. Have a good one.